You are listening to Meet the Thriller Author, the podcast where I interview writers of mysteries, thrillers, and suspense books. I am your host, Alan Peterson, and this is episode number 152. In this episode of the podcast, we'll be meeting Alma Katsu, who is an author of 5 novels. Her latest is an exhilarating spy thriller, Red Widow, which was published on March 23rd of this year. Prior to the publication of her first novel, she had a 35-year career as a senior intelligence analyst for several U.S. agencies, including the CIA and the NSA. It was a real pleasure to talk to Alma about her writing process, about her amazing career in intelligence, and about blending those two worlds of novels, of entertainment, and being true to the intelligence community. And it's an interesting balancing act, but it's really amazing to talk to Alma, who's actually worked in the field, who not only writes spy thrillers, but actually worked in the intelligence community. So stay tuned for my interview with Alma coming up here in just a second. Quick reminder to go check out thrillingreads.com/links. You'll find all my links out over there, including joining my mailing list and places to go and rate and review this podcast and all that good stuff. So go check that out at thrillingreads.com/links. All right, here is my interview with Alma Katsu. Hi, everybody. This is Alan with Meet the Thriller Author. And on the podcast today, I'm really excited. I have Alma Katsu, who is the author of 5 novels. Her latest is an exhilarating spy thriller, Red Widow, which was published on March 23rd. And prior to her publication of her first novel, she had a 35-year career as a senior intelligence analyst working for agencies you might have heard of, like the CIA and the NSA. So very excited to have her on the podcast today. Welcome, Alma.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for being here. And then, I was looking at your bio. Red Widow is your first thriller, correct? You've written other books, but it's your first thriller?
Well, it's my first spy thriller. Some people consider like the last 2, The Hunger and The Deep, as thrillers, but more, in the horror thriller area.
Oh, okay. Interesting. Yeah. So did you do that because you have so much experience in the intelligence community? You didn't want to do spy thrillers at first, or how did that come about?
I know it seems really crazy, and it is crazy, I guess. When I was like a lot of writers, it took me a long time to actually write that first novel that was saleable, and about 10 years. And during that time, of course, I met with agents and editors, and they all said the same thing, that I should write a spy thriller because that's what my platform would be. And so I tried, but I guess, a couple things. One is that maybe that wasn't my first instinct. But second of all, I was still working in intelligence at the time. And working in the field complicates things because, you have this non-disclosure agreement that you sign when you get a security clearance. And even though I wasn't planning on, disclosing any secrets, it sort of hangs in the back of your mind when you're still working. They also have sort of other things that they worry about. So it's just more difficult if you're still in the field. So I was retired a few years before Red Widow was published. I think I had just retired when I talked it over with my editor, and she really encouraged me to give it a try. And I sort of felt a little less encumbered.
So since you were retired, you didn't have to run it by them or anything like that, or?
Well, I still did. It did go through pre-publication review, and they didn't ask for any changes, which really, really surprised me. So the other things that they have control over when you're still working for them. One is it an ethical issue. So they get the Office of Ethics involved, and they kind of feel like while you're still in the job that you shouldn't be making money at it in another way. And so that's a pretty tough hurdle to clear. And the other one, believe it or not, had to do with media. So when my first book came out, which was The Taker, which was more of a paranormal historical thriller, they wanted 4 days notice, for instance, before I could talk to any media figure. And, in the business, that's just not how it happens. Simon & Schuster was sending me to book fairs and stuff where you sit in a tent and you wait for media people to just come up and talk to you. So I couldn't guarantee them the 4 days. And I actually had to leave government service when my first book came out.
Wow. And did you always want to be a writer, even when you were working in intelligence for all those years? Is that always in the back of your mind, or how long have you wanted to be a writer?
It's kind of crazy. We, as old timers, we say nowadays we never would have gotten hired by CIA or whatever because we're not that specialized. But in the old days, they were hiring people and looking for aptitude. So for instance, I started at NSA, and NSA would give you, like, you had these 3 days of tests in order for them to decide whether or not they wanted to make you a job offer. And I just thought, after I did the tests and they offered me the job, I was surprised. I never envisioned that I would go work in intelligence. And I just thought I'd stay for a few years just for the experience. Give me something to write about in a way. Not that I went into intelligence thinking that I would write a spy thriller. One day I didn't. I just meant it was just something novel, something that not everybody did, right? And so I thought I'd go and I'd work there a few years and then I'd quit and I'd go back to what I'd always hoped to be, a writer. I mean, I started out as a newspaper reporter. But that didn't happen. The career is pretty fascinating, and you get a chance to do a lot of things that you never thought you would. And so I stayed for an entire career, and I did kind of stop writing on the outside at a certain point, because it's very apparent to you when you're in intelligence that they don't want you to have an outside life, even if it's totally separate from your work in intelligence. They kind of want you to maintain a low profile.
And is that something, do you find that to be a challenge? Because I'm sure with your experience of trying, if you read a spy thriller by someone who is in that community, you're trying to keep it realistic, but you have to entertain. Was that a kind of a balance? Do you find that kind of weird to do?
It's really tough. And I think that's part of the reason why in my early attempts, I didn't do it very well, because I felt this pressure to try to write a book that was more true to life. Because most people that I know in the field, while some of them may enjoy popular culture, spy movies and TV shows and all that kind of stuff, we tend to not find it very realistic. And then when editors and agents find out that you're in the business, they all say to you, well, we want you to write a book that tells it like it really is. Well, that would be very boring to most people who like, popular culture stuff. So trying to square that circle was a big challenge for Red Widow. And I have to say, I think I did a pretty good job, because the reviews are in, and most people have said that on one hand, they really like that it gives that insight into what it's really like to work at CIA. But I don't think anybody so far has said it's boring.
Yeah, and I was reading a review of yours from, I believe it's called the Cipher Brief. And
oh, yeah, the Cipher.
Yeah, that was really cool. And it's actually written reviewed by intelligence professionals, and they loved it because of the realism, but it was still a great story. So that must have been nice from your peers.
It is. I mean, one of the things that's been really rewarding is I get a lot of emails from, like, retired folks, and they all say the same thing, that it is the most realistic portrayal of the culture at CIA and the atmosphere and what it's like to be in it. Now, there's always going to be a few things that people are going to nitpick, and I don't want to give away any spoilers, but somebody in the book who is an intelligence agent does do something that would be considered a big betrayal of their country. And for someone who's dedicated their whole life to protecting the country, the thought of one of your peers doing that you just can't think of them any other way than that person is a traitor. That person should be punished to the full extent of the law. The thing that I found really interesting when I retired, and when I would talk to my editor or my agent about it, just about this very book, and they would be outraged that the person in the book, who is ultimately the bad guy, that he kind of gets away with it. And but that's exactly what happened in real life. So I do find, like, the views of the people who are inside and outside of the business are sometimes, they don't match up, right? yeah. Like, well, we want a little realism, but then it's like, whoa, wait a second. Right.
So can you give us a little bit more of the plot of Red Widow?
Sure. So the main character is Lindsay Duncan, and she's, youngish analyst, case officer, I should say, at CIA, who was a real rising star. She had some early successes, big successes, brought in a big Russian asset for the agency. And, she kind of gets rewarded for it, sent off to her next assignment. But you know how it is. Whenever you do really well, sometimes you attract the wrong kind of attention. People get jealous of your success. So she ends up kind of being shot down a little bit, and she's sent back to CIA in disgrace. Well, she gets the opportunity. She kind of sees it as a way to redeem herself, to lead this task force looking for what they suspect is a mole. Somebody might be giving away CIA's Russian assets because they're starting to get rolled up. And so, she's asked to head this investigation. In the course of doing that, she befriends another officer at CIA, Teresa Warner, who's sort of known infamously as the Red Widow because her husband was killed in an ops that goes terribly wrong in Moscow a few years earlier. But in the course of doing the investigation, Lindsay kind of stumbles across this web of intrigues all these secrets that she was never supposed to find out. And that trail leads directly to Teresa, the Red Widow. And so what happens there is,
we'll have to read.
It's the whole point of the book. Yeah.
And so the main character, Lindsay, is a female CIA officer. So is she based on you? I have to ask.
No, but she is based on a lot of officers I know. Like I said, I had a very long career, and I also had the opportunity to spend 1 year as a recruiter. I was I was the lead recruiter for the Northeast. So Yale, Harvard, all these big name schools. And I would see the same kind of candidates over and over again. These young men and women who just really wanted to serve their country, their heart's in the right place. They want to do good. And you see them go into the agency, and it's probably the same at most large organizations, right? You kind of see some of that, good-hearted aspiration kind of get kicked out of them a little bit over the first couple years. That's kind of what it's like. Like, no matter how much you want to do good, you end up sort of just being beaten up a little bit, right, by the needs and the culture of the organization you go into. I'm probably a little bit more like the second main female character, Teresa Warner, who also, had a great career, did very well. But after her husband's death, she's a little tainted by his failure. CIA is not an organization where failure is taken very well, let's say, especially a spectacular failure. And so she ends up kind of suffering for it a little bit. And there's other things that happen. Again, I don't want to give away any spoilers, that kind of shows her that maybe the agency doesn't always have your best interests at heart, and she ends up feeling maybe a little betrayed, and that can make you kind of mad.
like any corporate company or business, right?
Absolutely.
I think it's really cool too that you have the main characters are women, because most of the CIA books you read, usually it's a guy. Was that something that you wanted, that was important to you, to represent the female agents?
Absolutely. Not to make I was going to say not to make too much of it, but it's kind of impossible not to make a lot of it, because it is one of the points of the book. But there's a lot of women professionals in intelligence. I can't give you exact numbers, but you could say it's about half, right? Just like the regular population, or reflection of the population in the United States. And we don't see ourselves reflected very much in popular culture about spies, whether it's movies or TV or books. I'd say TV is probably getting a little better, but especially in books, it really skews towards the sort of, I'm going to say it's stereotypical hero figure, right? It's usually a man, it's usually skews towards more physical action. Maybe there's a lot of gunplay or whatever.
Paramilitary.
Yeah. And I can understand why readers would embrace something like that, but that's not typical really for intelligence, first of all. And it certainly doesn't reflect what a lot of the women go through. And I knew there's a lot of great stories out there that involve the women, and I really wanted to get a chance to show that. And I'm just so lucky that Putnam, my publisher, decided, yeah, let's go there. So,
yeah, I love the realism too. As I grew up in Costa Rica, and I remember my mom in the 80s. A friend of ours worked for the embassy, and it ended up with the whole Iran-Contra thing. His name ended up coming out, and he got in trouble, blah, blah, blah. But I remember thinking, like, he's a spy. So this is like a regular guy with a suit, like an accountant. So it's kind of cool to see the actual realistic portrayal versus the superhero type.
Yeah, I mean, you hit it nail on the head. When you work at the agency, and this isn't a huge secret because you've seen it portrayed mostly in older movies, not really, maybe in the last 10 years, but they did say we want a gray man. We want somebody who is going to blend in, who people aren't going to take notice of, so that they can, kind of work under the radar and do what they have to do. Kind of the opposite of some chiseled, Navy SEAL guy with just bristling with hardware, right? That is not really what intelligence work is about.
So I was kind of curious about your writing process then as well. I mean, did you put in a lot of research before you actually sit down and start writing the book? And do you outline? I was kind of curious what your process is like.
Well, it depends on the book. So one of the things I've really enjoyed about Red Widow is it's a lot less research. It's something that I've done for over 30 years, and it gets to the point where I really have a good sense of, for the plot points, what are the options, for the characters, and so which one should I take? I don't have to really research it quite so much. Isn't that lazy of me? But you can forgive me, because my previous two books, for instance, The Hunger and The Deep, are historical horror. So they're based on actual historical events, and I just sort of reimagine them with this horror twist. The amount of research that has to go into them is astronomical. Like The Hunger, which was a reimagining of the story of the Donner Party, about 100 characters in the actual event, takes place over a very specific route, over a very specific time. So there's a lot of research that's involved to make sure, you're triangulating everything right. And then you jump this order of magnitude when you go to the Titanic, because that was 2,300 people on a ship. You had the same problem of, now, again, I should explain, right? I'm a professional research analyst. So all of these sort of like, what's the factor, what elements are involved, what's the, how should they play, how much weight do you give them, right? This is like all second nature to me. And I realize this probably isn't what most people even think about when they read historical fiction, and start to think about what was the research process like. So I'm kind of giving you a shorthand, breaking it down. For The Deep, the Titanic book, it was a huge amount of work. And like I said, I've been doing this a long time. I've not only been an analyst, but I've run huge research projects. I was the director of a research lab for the Defense Department. I worked at the RAND Corporation. I ran huge multi-million-dollar research projects. And I'm telling you, that book gave me pause. Do I really want to do this level of research? And how am I going to juggle all those facts? I'm glad I did, but yeah, that was a huge undertaking. So by comparison, Red Widow is a lot easier, thank God. Yeah.
And is it a standalone, or is it going to be part of a series? Or
I'm happy to say that the publisher, we just gave us the green light on the second book.
Oh,
so
awesome.
I am hoping it's going to turn into a series. And there's it's in active development with Fox for a TV series. That's actually why I was a little late jumping on the call, because we were just talking to the showrunner about how we're going to break out the season. Yeah. So.
Oh, wow. Exciting.
It's crazy. I wanted to do this because I wanted to get a sense of how do TV writers, do what they do, because their approach to drama and everything is so different from a book. And it's just crazy, because here you are talking with people and you're literally like dicing up this story that you worked so hard on. I described Red Widow as like a giant Jenga puzzle, because everything's so tightly meshed, all the clues and everything that lead through it. And you're watching these people, it's like they're playing three-dimensional chess and you were playing checkers. It's insane. So yeah, you get really lost in all of the, all of the details, and they have to make it so much more dramatic too. That's fun.
Wow. So yes, I would imagine it's a whole different type of writing for a television or a movie versus a book. That has to be a lot more zeroed in, I guess.
And they have to come up with so many more twists and so many more hooks. And of course, it's very visual. And, in books, you can really go into a character's mind and kind of really show what they're thinking about. And of course, you can't really do that in TV. You can show things, but you can't really get into the character's head.
Yeah. Interesting. And then do you Were you a fan of thrillers before you started to write your own books? Were you a big fiction reader, or not? Or are you probably
Oh,
too
I
busy?
love fiction. I read everything actually. So that makes me kind of bad in a way. Like, the horror community, they expect horror writers to a degree to sort of be really just immersed in the genre and to really know the horror canon, and to have read all the classics and all that. And I'm not really that, right? I just like reading good books. So I, read all over the place. Yeah. Now, of course, when you're in the genre, and if you're lucky enough to, kind of work your way up a rung or two, then you start getting asked to blurb a lot of books. So I'm actually reading probably more horror and more thrillers than I would if I were left to my own devices.
Yeah. That's the fun part when you start getting all those books sent to you. But I can imagine it's a little overwhelming.
It gets seasonal too, I think, because publishers, they have a glut in the spring and they have a glut in the fall. And so then, they start rolling out the books for blurbs like 6 months in advance or so. And so, yeah, there'll just be a few weeks where you're getting, like, I was getting 6 a day
Oh,
requests for
wow.
blurbs. I know. And of course, you can't read 6 books a day. And you just hate saying no to anybody because you remember how hard it is to get a blurb. So yeah, it's gets kind of intense.
Uh, any we think of any spy thrillers recently that you like that are kind of like more of a on the realistic front of things, or like
Geez, I the sad thing is I haven't had time to really keep up with as many, um, especially spy novels as I would like. I um I know Karen Cleveland's has a new one coming out. Karen is one of the few other writers who's had, female lead characters. And she writes very interesting books in that, she really shares the story plot between, having a more domestic angle, like, how does it affect my family?
Mhm.
She really comes up with plots that sort of hook in the family too, which is interesting because, in real life, we tend to divorce those two worlds. You can't talk to your family about what you did in the office that day, for instance, right? My husband really, well, he's a musician too. He could care less about world events. So, he had no idea from day to day what I was working with or what might be bothering me. Or, there were many times where I was working almost 24 hours a day and I'd come home, 10 o'clock at night, and we'd be sitting there and something would come on the news and I'd look at him and I'd get up and I'd know I'd have to go right back in the office. And so then he'd know, oh, well, she was probably working on that thing that was just on the news. But she does a really good job at balancing the two. There's a lot of great, especially like Jean Le Carre. I love Jean Le
Mhm.
Carre's work because he always, he was very cognizant of how working in espionage puts you in this moral gray area all the time, and how do you struggle with it?
Mhm.
When do the ends really justify the means?
Yeah, and I believe he was also an intelligence officer. I'm not 100% sure.
Yeah,
John
he
Le
was.
Carre. Yeah, okay.
He used to tell people he'd only done it for a few years, but then I think towards the end of his career,
Yeah.
we found out that he spent more time in it than he let on. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. And so what's a writing day look for you like when you're writing a book? Do you do you write every day? Do you try to have like a set hours? Just kind of curious about your writing process.
Well, I do. I'm one of those authors that think you really should write every day, that writing is like a muscle. And so you develop this sort of muscle memory. I find if for whatever reason, I have to take more than a couple days break from writing, it takes like 3, 4 days to sort of get back into the flow of things so that everything isn't so herky jerky and, makes you want to run away screaming that you can't write anymore. So I do try to do that. But one thing is, and I think this has to do a lot with just having such a long career. You learn to trust yourself when you're like really in the best mood to write, like new, or when you need to edit or need to do other work. Because as a writer's life is juggling a lot of different skills, really. And especially once you get published, you end up having to do a lot of marketing and promotion and to direct a lot of that yourself, all the way down to creating your own graphics, right? So
Hmm.
um, you just kind of learn to pace yourself and to not wait for the muse to strike so much as to just do what you need to do at that moment and force yourself to move on and do the next thing you need to do. So yeah, I do think that I write, and when I'm creating new, I do best first thing in the morning. So I try to jump on the computer right away.
Yeah, so I always tell aspiring writers that listen to this podcast is a lot of people are like, well, I just want to write. Well, that doesn't work that way. You just have to have a lot of stuff you have to do, no matter who's publishing you, or if you're self-published or whatever. You have to do the work.
I think one of the hardest things it was for me to learn as I was making the transition is that writing, at least to me, is almost the least of it. And that editing, learning how to revise and how to accept direction from other people and knowing what to keep and what to ignore are the most important things. Because usually the real book comes through, I find, in the rewriting. That's when the deepening and the enrichment of the story and the characters, you've spent some time with them by then, and then you really start to understand their motivations, and you can make those tweaks to the story that really make it ring true.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I'm kind of curious now, I've been asking my guests of the crazy year plus that we've had. Has the pandemic affected your writing at all, your style? And are you going to address it in your future books?
Well, it's interesting. The question of, like, as a writer, how do I address the pandemic year is really interesting. And it's just starting to come through to me now. That it's something I'm going to have to grapple with. The year itself was a real crazy roller coaster ride. And you probably are finding this true for a lot of writers. We feel guilty because, like, on one hand, being forced to stay home is good for writing, right?
Good for business, yeah.
Yeah. So it was to the benefit. I had but the business itself went topsy-turvy. And so I had one book that came out literally the week that COVID broke in America and people started putting themselves in quarantine. And so I was on the road touring and I got pulled back in the middle of tour.
Oh, wow.
And that book, which was The Deep, did not have the greatest year. And I hate to complain because I know, COVID affected people in a lot of ways far more seriously than that, right? Mm-hmm. We lost loved ones, people got seriously ill, people lost jobs, businesses closed. It's hard to complain about a book sinking under the waves. It did impact it, but, at the end of the day, you carry on. And so, but then I had a lot of great successes. Like, we sold, Fox picked up the rights for the TV series during COVID, which was kind of a miracle because I found out later that studios bought very few properties because they didn't know when they would be getting back to work and all that. So, I had some great successes. I was able to get a lot of writing done, but the promotion side of it was very frustrating. Yeah.
Yeah, I think as writers, we've been practicing self-isolation for a long time. So
right. I kind of feel like I should have got more writing done.
Yeah. So what are you working on now? I know you're working on the television show, or what are you writing now? What's your current project?
Well, the crazy thing is I'm not a writer for the show. I'm one of the executive producers. So I'm learning, and I had never done television before, but they decided it was worth making me an executive producer to advise on, the spycraft of it all.
Yeah.
So that's interesting. I'm learning what it takes to put a TV series together, which is really hard and really crazy. I don't know how any TV show gets made. And 2 books. So the next book in the queue is going to be historical horror. It's The Fervor is the name of it. And it's actually a World War II based story. And it has to do with the Japanese internment. And I am half Japanese. My husband's family were all interned. Many of our friends' families were interned. So it's a historical event that I understand very well. But, all of the historical horror are really meant to sort of reflect not just what happened then, but why those stories are still relevant. And so it gives me an opportunity to really look at what's going on now in America and the anti-Asian hate movement and this rampant white nationalism. And gives me a chance to sort of look at COVID through this filter, because it's what happens in the book is sort of looked at as a disease that spreads. So anyway, that's what I'm working on right now. I'm doing the revision for it, like the umpteenth revision for it. And then I get to work on the next book in the Red Widow series, which is already completely plotted out. I hope it goes quick because it needs to. And that'll be for 2022, I think. No, 2023.
Oh, okay. Wow, they really planned them out way out in advance.
It's funny how fast the year seems to go by, too.
Yeah, this year's almost gone already. We're almost in May, practically.
Yeah.
It's crazy. So before I let you go, I always ask my guests, for our aspiring writers that listen to the show, any advice for them as a writing?
Oh, gosh. Yeah. But it's probably going to be advice they've heard already from other, right? Because we only have so many things to say, and that's read, and write. Like, yep. You're not going to get better as a writer unless you read and analyze other writers' work. And that's hard, I think. We all get into this because we love reading and we want the enjoyment and the pleasure of reading. And I've been chastised for saying this, but maybe it's because I'm an analyst, right? When you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail. I think you have to analyze what you're reading. Why does it work? Why does it not work? What parts do you like? What parts do you not like? In order to figure out then how to improve your own writing. And you have to write. I know not everybody writes every day. I would say the majority of writers will tell you need to write every day. But even when it's painful and it's not coming well, and it's almost like you're pulling out your own teeth, just force yourself to stay in the chair and force yourself to write another page and then 2 more pages. And if you keep doing that, it'll get better.
Yeah, that's good advice. Yeah, I love it. Okay, well, Alma, thank you so much for being on the podcast. I really enjoyed talking to you about thrillers, and Red Widow is out now, so the listeners need to go check that out for a great spy thriller.
Thank you so much. This was so much fun.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to this episode of Meet the Thriller Author. If you have a moment, please do check out thrillingreads.com/links, where you'll be able to rate and review this podcast, or simply rate this podcast wherever it is that you're listening to it, be it Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Audible, Amazon Music, whichever podcast app you prefer. Please take a moment to rate this podcast. It's the best way to help other fans of mystery and thriller books to find the podcast, and it helps me get the word out, and so it's the best way to support the podcast. So I do appreciate that. And if you're interested, you can join my Thrilling Reads mailing list. You'll find the sign-up form at thrillingreads.com/links. Once you subscribe for free, you'll be notified about discounts and deals on great books in the mystery, thriller, and crime fiction genres. You'll also find my social media links and my author website over at thrillingreads.com/links. So check it out and say hi. All right, take care and stay safe until we meet again on the next episode of Meet the Thriller Author.